for the benefit of the other students. So it's going to be, I'll upload it again more or less tomorrow or the day after, and then everybody can see it there. All right, so thanks, thanks, Steve. I was wondering if people were actually watching those previous recorded sessions. So yeah, interesting. All right, so what we're going to do in the next couple of sessions is, one of you suggested that we talk about project management. So what I'll do is I'll go through a bit of project management, and it's basically a synopsis of a course that I developed for an oil and gas company not too long ago, and I'll try and slim it down. So tonight I'm going to take you through about 30 or 40 slides, and we'll stretch it out over a period of about 10 or 12 weeks, and it's just ongoing, and there's no, obviously there's no exam. It's just interesting, and I'm looking forward to you guys also, of course, taking part in it, and making sure that there's interaction between everybody. All right, so there we go. Fiona, I've taken the presenter ball from you, so let's see if I can get my presentation shared. Alright, so there you go. What you should see on your board or on your screen at the moment is basically just the first slide, the introduction to project management. As I said, yes, there's a distortion on the speaker, Steve. I think what I'll do is Alright, so I've muted Scott. I think Scott was maybe the source of that distortion. So Steve, can you just confirm if the distortion is now gone, or can you still hear it?
No, it's gone.
Alright, great stuff. Alright, so there we go. Scott, there's just something wrong with your speakers, so we'll just fix it up. You can welcome to phone me in the office tomorrow, and we'll go through a test and make sure that we get it going. Alright, so I see we've been joined by Tracy as well. So Tracy is just, let's just wait a second for Tracy to get her microphone up and running. So Fiona, a quick question for you. Did you have a look at those answers that I posted for you on your questions from last week's session? Oh, Tracy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello, Joshua. How are you?
Oh, it's so good to hear your voice again. Yeah, no, it's going well, thank you. And how's the studies going?
I've been off Crook. I've had an operation, so I've been offline for about 2.5 weeks, so I'm just getting back into it.
All right. So, well, good luck with that. Let us know if there's anything that we can do for you, except your assignments, of course. But
damn.
We're welcome to smile at you and send you nice emails and everything. All right, so there we go. All right, so let's just go through what we're going to do, just for the benefit of Tracy that just joined us. Tracy, I think you guys might have even suggested that we talk about project management. So for the next couple of weeks, we're just going to go through the basics of project management according to the PMI, or the Project Management Institute in the States. And obviously, I'm going to add some stuff in there. This presentation that I'm running with you guys, it's actually a course. It's a full 5-day course that we're going to try and split into evenings on Tuesdays, and see how far we get. All right, so without waiting any further, basically there we go. The reason why I think we want to have these sessions is basically to make sure that the students are all aligned and try and get alignment in the industry. And this is one of the biggest challenges that will face us in the next couple of years, because there's no real legal protection for project managers, and it's not like being a lawyer or an engineer that requires formal registration or anything. So basically anybody can be a project manager of some sorts, and this creates a problem for us. And up here in the northern parts of Queensland, we see this happening more and more. Companies that's been around for many years are now starting to realize that their staff is not quite up to scratch from a business point of view. So they can do the physical work, but talking to the clients and making sure that the relationship management, that part is always a little bit iffy. All right, so if we can use those words. So basically what we're trying to do is make sure that, just as a start, we try and keep everybody on the same square. So what is project management specifically in the built environment for us? And these are the things that we're going to try and look at. Executive problem solving, how do we look at a problem, and what's the key things that we have to take into account when we're challenged with a new scenario that we haven't been in before. And this is going to happen if you've been around in the industry for many years. Probably you've seen most of the different scenarios. But if you're a newbie, a first year, or somebody that's maybe changed a career, you might be in a situation where you haven't been before. And then, of course, power and influence, and where do we get the power and influence from? And to a certain extent, the biggest power source and ability to influence is from the knowledge of information. So if you are the owner of specific political information, if you just look at our government at the moment, this whole Peter Slipper fiasco that's going on at the moment, so the people with whoever's got the most information, obviously they're going to get out on top. And then, of course, negotiation. One of the key issues that we are going to ask at the end of one of the sessions is, can there be a win-win negotiation situation? Is it possible to have a win-win, or is one party going to win a little bit more than the other party? All right, so I'll leave that up for you guys, and we can maybe discuss that later on as well. We're also going to talk a little bit about if you guys have a question, just go for it and let me know. We're also going to talk a little bit about the business development and implementation. So different companies uses different means of doing that. So typically there might be a stage gate approach that's followed when it comes to project management. So before you move on to the next phase, you first have to jump through a certain amount of hoops to make sure that you've ticked all the boxes and everybody's signed off on the project. It's just sort of a control mechanism to make sure that you're not chasing up the wrong tree and you're not spending money on something that's basically dead in the water. All right, when we look at project management, do you want somebody that is focused in a specific industry to be your project manager, or do you want somebody that's got a little bit of a wider experience? And this is where the facilitation comes in, because now you start thinking about, is it only about the technical skills, or are we actually going to start talking about management of people? What is project management? Is it management of knowledge? Is it management of technical aspects, scope, all of those things, execution of the project? Or is it managing of the people that's going to be responsible for the execution of that project? When you look at it, a project manager is really busy, but he can't do anything. The devil is in the detail, but at some point the project manager has to step back and say, I'm going to take a more strategic approach to this. I'm going to sort of use a helicopter view of this project, and this is how I'm going to manage it. So those are the fundamentals that we're going to look at. Basically the 9 knowledge areas of the Project Management Institute. We look at those: time, cost, quality, HR. Those are the ones that we look at, and later on tonight I'll highlight them again. And then, of course, we can't do these things without having toys. So associated tools, the software, the systems that we have that supports us, that's obviously really important. So process innovation involving changes, we're also going to end up with that tonight. We're going to look at why is it important in an organization to have business structures? Why is it important for us to have different accountability, and what's the difference between accountability and responsibility? And there's an easy way to remember that. And then also, what happens when it comes to relationships, and how do we report on those, and how do we maintain it? Because if you look at it, a project is basically like a marriage. Right? So when we start doing the bidding, this is the phase where we date, and many things can happen during that phase. And then, of course, once we sign the contract, this is now where we get married and execute. We get kids and stuff, and buy a Volvo station wagon maybe, and also have a dog and 2.5 kids. And towards the end, we sort of have to think, all right, what's the next logical step? So it's all about the relationship that we have to think. And then, of course, competency levels. Do we want a project manager that's been around the block, or do we want somebody that's just starting out? And remember, from the client's perspective, he's going to pay good money. So typically, they're going to try and see if they can get the best possible person for that. All right. So the culture and the utilization of teams, we'll also touch on that during later weeks. So one question that I can leave you with tonight so far is perhaps would you rather have a A-class opportunity with a B-class team, or would you like a A-class team with a B-class opportunity? All right, so those are the important questions that you have to think about when it comes to something like entrepreneurship, even, for instance. All right, so if we move on to the next slide, the common problems that we typically have in projects, and this is really common, this is all over the show in any type of industry, unrealistic expectations, and this is something that a lot of students also struggle with. Just for your information, I've muted everybody, so if you have a question or something, just unmute yourself again and start asking the question. But coming back to the unrealistic expectations, many students will enroll in 5 or 6 courses for a year and still work full-time and have a family. And from a project perspective point of view, this might create problems. So from our client's perspective, this is always a big issue, because a client will always try and get the most bang for his buck. And contractors, being their own worst enemies, will always try and over-promise and under-deliver. Not really, but that's how it comes out. And they will try and get the job. That's the main thing, is that get that foot in the door. Right, we'll also talk about the strategies that you can employ, how to get that first foot in the door. All right, and then of course the cost constraints, and it's not only cost over there. There's actually time and quality. Those are the 3 serious ones that's always in the mix: time, cost, and quality. And no matter what we do, we can't get away from those. Poorly defined scope of work, and in my experience, I would say the scope of work, if we look at the 9 knowledge areas of project management, scope is one of the most important ones. If you don't know what you want to achieve, it's going to be really difficult to get there at the end. So all of you guys know that you either want to become construction managers, or you want to become building certifiers, or that you want to become building designers. So that's the end goal. That's the scope of the work. Now you need to work out what happens in between. And for many clients, this is where the problem is, because we sort of have an idea of that house, that shiny house on the top of the hill, but how to get there, that's not always possible. And that's why they employ consultants, and consultants also sometimes just not sure about themselves, and sometimes waste a lot of money. Later on during the course, I'll give you a nice definition for consultants. All right, and then of course the unclear goals, or the mismatch of goals, or the moving of the goalposts. Let's say during the course of a project there's developments that we're not aware of, or there's a phenomenon that we call scope growth and scope creep. All right, so what's the difference between scope growth and scope creep? And the difference is, scope creep is the unauthorized enlargement of the scope. All right, so this would typically be something that was previously omitted from the scope that somehow got back in, but the contractor will not be paid for that. Scope growth, on the other side, is typically something that is an authorized increase of the scope. All right, so as a contractor, always make sure that you do document these things, otherwise it becomes really expensive for you to foot the bill at the end of the day. And there we go, one of the most important ones, of course, and you hear me say that continuously, people. All right, roles and responsibility. It's the management of people. Who's responsible for what, who's doing what, and when are they going to do it. All right, so the team is really important for us. That professional team that's going to work on the project, that's always important to make sure that we align ourselves with that. And then of course bureaucracy, red tape. This week I've had my fair share of red tape at the university. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. trying to get some information on new programs going. It's just almost impossible, the amount of red tape that we have to go through. Alright, so there's our little joke for the night. This comes from Kersner, and it's really applicable. The 7 phases of project management, and this is, if you really think about it, this if you want to print out a slide of tonight's presentation, this would be it. Wild enthusiasm. This is when we start out our project. Everybody is really upbeat about it, and everybody just wants to make things happen. And you sort of can relate this back to your studies. I mean, that first time that you were part of the student cohort, you really upbeat about your studies and you want to make the best of it. And this is typically what happens on a project as well. The second phase is disillusionment, and this is where we start reading the scope document and see that we actually have to do stuff in order to reach the end goal, and that our initial ideas are not as clear as they should be. Confusion follows that closely with the difference between roles and responsibilities. People unsure about who's responsible for what, who's going to do what, where's the project manager, where's the client, what type of contract are we going to use? Are we going to use an AS contract, or are we going to use an NEC contract? All of those questions lead to panic and confusion. Then, of course, as soon as the project starts losing money and starts going wrong, and this typically happens within the, let's say, the 40 percentile point of the contract execution time, the search for the guilty. Right, and this is where some people or some heads must roll, and then some innocent people that's not been part of the project, they need to be punished, and their heads will roll as well. And then, of course, the promotion of the non-participants to the project. So it's 7 basic steps, and it looks kind of funny, but if you really look at it, it is actually really applicable to all types of projects that we find ourselves in. If we start thinking a little bit further into where project management comes from, the origins, and the first real projects that we saw, maybe the Egyptians when they started building the pyramids, and even before then some other structures. That's really the Mayans. They're really well known for their major construction feats. More recently, defense and weapon systems, the Navy. If we think of Henry Grant, he's the guy that sort of pioneered the Gantt chart. And why did he start using Gantt charts, or why do we call it the Gantt charts? He was responsible in the First World War to build boats or ships for the Navy, and the only way that he could follow his own progress was by creating these charts. And he presented that to the Department of Defense, and that's how the Gantt chart came to life. Over the last couple of years, finance and information technology, the bottom line is always going to be finance, so that's a good industry to be in, especially if you're in a bank. IT, quick question. A project manager that's good in construction, will that project manager be good in IT, for instance? And are all projects the same? Right, and then of course sports services, political campaigns, all of those in there as well. If we look at our personal life, we all have small little projects going. I mean, if I just look at myself, I set myself a goal to say, all right, I'm going to emigrate and I'm going to get into Australia. That was a big thing. I had to plan that. It took me about 3 years to get everything in order, and I set small little times and small little goals for my different projects. And this is how we do it in our private and personal life, and I'm sure you guys do exactly the same. So why has project management really become a buzzword? It's just in the last, let's say, 30 years that this has really started picking up speed. If we think about the late 80s, early 1990s, everybody started using the word project management, even though it's been around for ages. But it's all about dropping the right terms and names and acronyms at the cocktail parties, and that's why project management suddenly came to the front. So globalization, the world's definitely becoming a smaller arena to work in. If you think about the internet, sort of started in 1994, 95, really picked up speed 96, and up until the point where we are today, where it's really, really easy. Look at us, we're having a class, and some of you guys are all over the show. I'm sitting up north in central Queensland, so It's just amazing where the boundaries of the world has shrunken to. Projects, different types of projects, short life cycles. Typically, information technology projects have a life cycle of less than 12 months. Big construction projects will typically run for up to 4 or 5 years even. If you think about those construction projects in the Middle East, for instance, the Burj Al Arab or the Burj Dubai, those are all projects that took a number of years to complete. If we look at the clients that we have to work with, the project managers become more tech savvy. They've been around the block as well, so they know what to look out for, and they become more demanding. All right, in this ever continuing game of trying to save money for the clients, the project managers become more brutal, and obviously it has its effects. All right, and then of course also projects become more complex. Another question for you guys would be, what would you rather do? A $50 million desalination plant or a $50 million housing complex? All right, so which of those two projects are going to be more difficult than the other? All right, the other thing that we have to think about, the parties. Remember what we said about roles and responsibility. It's always important for us to define those. And then of course outsourcing in our own backyard. Is it going to be cheaper and easier getting somebody else to do it? And this is a real important question for everybody in Australia basically, and it has to do with the expense or the cost of labor. Labor in Australia is really expensive if you compare it to other countries, and it makes it more difficult for us to move at the same speed. Alright, so we'll have to see exactly where that goes with our 2 or 3 speed economy. The mining industry, obviously, they run their own speed. The rest of the country, they run a little bit slower, and it has its effects. Alright, so the question is now, why do we have to plan? Basically, we have to try and find out what we don't know. And by planning, we sort of put parameters there for ourselves to attain, and it removes some of the uncertainty that we have. By planning, we also force ourselves to have certain deadlines, increasing our efficiency. If you think about this in your personal life, your assignments are due at a specific time and date, so you work to make sure that you attain those dates. There's a principle called the Parkinson's principle that says that a task at hand will take the same amount of time that you have available for it. So that just says that the more time we have, the more time we take. Alright, so we need to constantly try and improve our efficiency. The objectives, the goals, really important for us to try and understand it. If we want to increase our efficiency, number 4 reads into number 2, because monitoring and controlling will allow us to say, alright, these are the benchmarks that we had in our previous project, and now we're going to do it a little bit different, and we're going to try and see if we can increase our productivity. Project and corporate alignment. This, of course, is where we are. It depends on where we are. If you work for a big corporate organization or a parastatal or a government organization, this is much more bearing on you than, say, a small-time organization in the Middle East or in Africa, for instance. Alright, something that we shouldn't forget as well is the influence of the environment on a lot of these projects. Right, so something that wasn't there 20 years ago now suddenly is a big thing. Alright, and then of course we need to make sure that what we want to achieve is actually doable. Can we achieve it? Is it constructible? Alright, so the next couple of slides, this is just a few projects that sort of gives us a short history of projects, and you can see there's the approximate time when they were constructed. So the first one that's really important there is basically the Egyptian pyramids. That's just amazing. 2,500 years ago, that they managed to construct those structures there. They had to bring those blocks about 600 kilometers down the Nile, and on top of that they managed a tolerance or a movement tolerance between the blocks of between 4 and 40 millimeters. So that's really an impressive tolerance for a really old community. The other one that's really interesting there, Suez Canal, and also, of course, the one that's my favorite, the Concorde. We'll go through a few photos of those just to sort of show you guys what's happening there. Yep. So the Great Wall of China. This is I haven't been there. This is on my to-do list. So hopefully, when I get my Aussie passport soon, I'll be able to go there and go and have a look at what it looks like. This is basically sort of a border protection scheme that they had, 6,500 kilometers, which is really a mean feat for that. And there you can see, I just tried today to find a few Google pictures of the structures, and you can see it's really something that's out of the ordinary. And if ever you can go to China, I suggest we should actually maybe consider a group tour towards the end of your study. The previous university that I worked with, every year the final year students, we undertook a tour, and we typically ended up in Dubai because that's where most of the construction work happened. But maybe it's something that we can consider for our little cohort as well. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, seeing that you guys are all distance students and you are all over the country, but yeah, maybe I'll start planning that. There's another photo of the Great Wall of China, and you can just see the amazing structure of the wall, the detail that has gone into. If you look at the gables of this gatehouse that's in front of us there, it's just amazing to think, how did they do it, how did they figure out the logistics, all of that stuff. They didn't have any 4x4s or helicopters or anything like that in which to do that. So another project that's really interesting, the Crystal Palace. This was in 1851. So the big thing that sort of drew my attention to this project is just the amount of glass. I mean, 84,000 square meters of glass. That's just tremendous. If you try and put that together, it's quite a bit. Unfortunately, the structure was destroyed by a fire, and there are really no good photographs of that. So this is the best that I could find of it today. It's a picture that's obviously a painting of the Crystal Palace, and then later on that same day, I think they took the painting again, if you can basically use those words. So there you can see it's gone down. If we look at the next one, the Suez Canal, this is also really an interesting one, really a dangerous one. If you read the second last point there, about 120,000 people died from the execution of this project. So it took a while to do it, 11 years. If you think about that, it's about 10,000 people a year dying on a project. So if we bring that into context into Australia, how many people die annually in construction projects in Australia? And I think the number is less than 10. We've really come a long way since then. If we have a look at the photos, I've tried to add 2 photos on one slide there, and yes, well, that 1,900 cost overrun, Steve, that's going to, it's definitely going to look bad on your CV. But one of the projects that we're going to talk about as well is the Sydney Opera House. So that one also ran over considerably. So there you can see, that's just the sheer size of the Suez Canal. You can see there's a battle cruiser going along in the middle of the desert. And one of the other photos that I saw there on the net today was it looks like this ship is sailing through the sand dunes. So interesting. Alright, so I'm being a pilot, this has always been one of my favorite ones, the Concorde. 2 of these supersonic projects were sent or were started in the late 60s, and one was by the Russians and the other one was by the French and the English. And obviously the Russians, they do, the Tupolev still flies, but it wasn't ever as successfully as the Concorde. So the big thing there is, of course, that you could fly from New York to London in a little under 3 hours. All right, so that's amazing. I can't even get to Brisbane in 3 hours from here. If I drive to the speed limit, and even if I don't drive to the speed limit, it's still going to be really difficult. And of course there's also our cost overrun, Steve, that's specifically there for you, 1100%. Not going to look good on your CV. So there's just a nice photo. Obviously these planes were decommissioned. You can go and see them. There's one outside of Heathrow in London. That's just a monument there. Really a small plane inside, and I've got a little photo of the cockpit, and this used to always, because of the speed and the heat exchange between the inner and the outer shell, there used to be a lot of condensation inside the cockpit, and it sort of during flight stretched 4 centimeters, so that's 40 millimeters because of the heat exchange. Alright, so that's really ingenious if you think this plane can fly at maximum speed from taking up and until landing. Alright, so there we go. There's the last one. There's the Sydney Opera House. We don't want to spend too much time on this one. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this, and the reason why we're not going to spend too much time on this one is it's unsure as to if it is really a 1,400% cost overrun. Many new articles are coming to light now that says actually because of the scope increases, because of the changes in design, it might not have been as bad as 1,400% at the outset. So there we go. Power supply to the Sydney Opera House can power about half of Rockhampton, 25,000 people. So there's about 65,000 people living in Rocky at the moment. So yep, the Opera House will definitely get us going. Alright, so there's one of my favorite views of the Opera House. I took this photo not too long ago when I was there, and I thought I'd include that for you guys. Alright, so more recently, the developments in terms of project management. We briefly spoke about Henry Gantt, and he was the father of Gantt charts. Remember what we said about him building the boats or the ships for the Navy, and that of course also led on to the work breakdown structures or the resource allocation, because using these Gantt charts we can now say, alright, these are the resources that we have available, and these are the resources that we are going to assign to the different jobs that we have. Alright, so at this time, if you guys have any questions, just remember that you can use the chat function, or if you want, you can just unmute yourself and start talking. How you unmute yourself is just take your mouse up to the center of the screen where it says you are viewing Joshua's screen, and you'll see there's a little participants and chat window there, and you should be able to access that from there. Alright, so moving right along in the 1950s. For those of you guys who are history buffs, this is also a really interesting period in the United States history, where they had the space race between the States and the Russians. Makes for interesting reading. The Cold War is always one of my favorite Sunday night sort of topics that I like to read about and do a little bit of research about. So that led on to different organizations being created in the States. One of them is called DARPA, and DARPA is still responsible for most of the development of the Department of Defense projects in the US today. And some of the others that's in there as well is, of course, the Program Evaluation Review Technique, or PERT. And PERT is obviously also used in other industries now. So more statistically orientated, so typically organizations that deal with research and innovation will use PERT as opposed to Activity on Arrow or any of those, or Critical Path even. Those of you guys who haven't done construction planning yet, these topics are really well handled in that course, and also in about week 5 of this course I'll talk about the different planning techniques that's available to us. Alright, so a few funky abbreviations. Next time that you guys have a cocktail party where you have to impress your boss or somebody that you might want to go and work for, The critical path method, when did it come around? 1959, so it's been around for a number of years. PERT, 1959, came about because of the Navy. And then of course the other one that's sort of died a slow death, the cost schedule control system and criteria. We don't use this at all in Australia. In fact, I haven't seen it at any of the projects, even in the Middle East where I've worked in the last, say, 15 years. PDM, this is definitely one that we do use, precedence diagrams, where we say activity A has to be completed before activity B can commence. Alright, so those are just some funky acronyms that you can use for next time. Alright, so on to the first 4 project variables. And remember, or first 5, basically we said that there were 9 knowledge areas. So I have a quick question for you guys. Take a piece of paper and write them down: time, cost, scope, risk, and schedule. And the question is, which of these would you say can the project manager influence, and which of them are influenced by the client? Right, so if you're struggling with the question, you can change the word project manager to contractor and client to employer, for instance. All right, so time, cost, scope, risk, and schedule. Which of those are controlled by our project manager, and which of those are controlled by the client? All right, so those are ones that you can think about. If you think about it a little bit, you're welcome to add it onto your chat screen, or I'll give you guys some time a little bit later to talk about it. Alright, so moving on to the next slide, project specifics. Something that we have to keep in mind when we talk about these projects is, what type of project is it going to be? Is it going to be a complex project? Is it going to be a brownfields, greenfields? Is it going to be a return to service? What is the scope for our project? Who's responsible for creating the scope? Will the client know what they want to achieve with the scope? And in my experience, many times, for instance, that project that we discussed last week, all that the client knew is that they had a requirement for 5,300 people to stay on a man-made island, and how they were going to do it, they were not sure of. Alright, so in that case, they would get in a contractor, either an EPC or EPCM, to come and assist them with that definition for the project. Alright, we have to keep in mind what the constraints are that we are going to function within. Alright, so for instance, what's the environmental impact going to be? What's the financial impact going to be? What about legalities? What about the logistics because of the location of our project? How is that going to influence it? And then of course the question about complexity that I asked earlier on. How do we define the complexity? Is it easier to build a $50 million desalination plant, or is it easier to build a $50 million housing complex, for instance? Alright, so the next question that we have to think about is our client, and I've tried to make this as simple as possible. Obviously, in many cases you'll see that you might have multiple clients on a specific project. So for today, let's assume that we only have a simple client contractor relationship. Alright, so if it's a multidisciplinary project, we might find ourselves in a situation where we have to satisfy more than one boss. Alright, and this, now we start thinking about the word matrix. Alright, because you might have more than one reporting line that you have to satisfy. If it's a single client, makes it a little bit easier, and even more easy if the client is a novice. Alright, in that case, you can basically take control of the project, make it work for the client. If the client becomes an expert in a specific field, they do become more demanding because they've been around the block. They sort of know what they want to achieve. They might have executed a similar project previously, and they might find that they don't want to make the same mistakes again. And then of course the location, the budget that we have available, and the schedule of time. Alright, so those are always there: time, cost, and quality. That little triangle will always be in all projects. And what we see is quality is starting to pick up speed, but basically for a project manager, what's the most important? Time and cost. Right, so time and cost always weighs heavier. If all remains the same, something has to give, and typically it's going to be quality that gives, because there's always enough money to fix up the quality issues after the project manager has moved on to the next project. Alright, so for the professional organizations, links to these organizations, I've placed a few links onto the website, so you guys can go and have a look at their websites as well. Project Management Institute, they've been around for ages. I'm also a member of them. If you really need somebody to send you a lot of spam email, I suggest you also join them. It's quite expensive. Alternatively, you can go to the Australian Institute of Project Management, which is much more lean, and they are much more focused on getting stuff done. There's a number of organizations outside of Australia that's available for membership. It just depends on where you guys want to go with your careers. Do you want to stay in Australia? Do you want to move on? Is it going to be something that you are going to think about working in a different world or a different part of the world? Alright, so the next slide, and you might ask the question, is why is it showing us worldwide corruption sort of maps on a presentation in terms of project management? Well, it's really important for us to understand how the rest of the world sees us. Alright, because it's going to influence the types of contracts that we sign with them, the type of agreements that we have with them. It might influence the way that they are going to provide goods and services to us. So previously I was from there in South Africa. That's where I lived for many years. I also did a lot of work over there in the Middle East, and a lot of work over there in Nigeria. So you'll see there the different colors of the continent of Africa. The darker shades are less trustworthy, while the lighter shades are more trustworthy. So the Corruption Perception Index, that CPI over there, is the Corruption Perception Index. The lighter the color, the more trustworthy that nation is supposed to be. So you can see there's Australia is over there quite yellow, so that means that the CPI is about 8 to 8.8 to 8.9, and New Zealand over there is even higher. It's around about 9 to 10. And we always have to ask the question is, why is 9 to 10 for New Zealand there? And it might be to do with the limited exposure that they have because of the they don't have lots and lots of industry or development going there, and it's also really a small country in terms of population. For Australia, the impact, if we have to get stuff from Europe, for instance, means that if we are yellow or white, in terms of the CPI, it's going to be easier for companies to provide us with goods and services. It's going to be easier. If we think about a country like Nigeria, for instance, over there is what protection will companies in Germany and France require before they start doing business with that country? Alright, so there's the list for the last 4 years. I couldn't find the figures for 2011 yet. I think they're still working on those. They should be out soon. But there you can see the first 4 or 5 places are always the same. Australia is sort of hanging around the number 10 spot there. And interestingly enough, Nigeria is not the most untrustworthy country in the world. It's basically Somalia or Myanmar. And Somalia, obviously, that's where all the rebels and the pirates come from. So it's interesting to see exactly how it fits together. You can also see the changes that's happened during the last couple of years, things that's influenced the rankings internationally. Strange enough, the first 3 or 4 spots are always the same. Alright, so back to project management, and why is it important for us to understand how it all fits together. In terms of project management, there's basic rules and regulations that's generally accepted. It's like doing accounting in Australia, doing accounting in the UK, doing accounting in the States. There's some generally accepted rules that's always going to be applicable, and the same goes for our management knowledge and practice. And obviously there's going to be some overlaps between the application area and the knowledge that we have and those rules that we have. So you can see there, the more globalized we become, the closer these circles will become, and the bigger the overlap between the areas are going to be. The more knowledge, or the bigger the body of knowledge is that we're going to build up, the more it's going to start overlapping. And as time progresses, we record more and more information on the projects that we execute, building on to this model that we have. Alright, so there's our slide on the 9 knowledge areas of project management, and this is a slide that's going to come up continuously during the next couple of weeks. And there you can see there's our 9 knowledge areas: scope management, time, cost, procurement, quality, communications, human resources, risk maintenance, and of course the risk management and integration management. And during the next couple of weeks, what we'll do is we'll take each of these and we'll dissect it. Alright, so we'll start with scope management, and we'll look at scope planning, definition, the creation of a work breakdown structure. Why is that important for us in terms of a construction project, or any type of project for that matter? The same with time, the same with cost, and the same with procurement. All of them we'll handle individually, and each of them represents at least a 2 or a 3 week session that we can talk about it. I'll give you some examples. I might even, if you guys are keen on it, I'll give you a few things to try and do at home, but I'm not sure. I think you have enough homework as it is, so we'll talk about that some more later. Some practicalities that we have to remember when it comes to project management: of course, the geographical location. So if we're in Australia, if we're in South Africa, what is the laws of the country? How does it influence the labor laws? How is the tax laws going to influence our project? If we look at the budgets, how is the internal rate of return going to be playing an instrumental role? We know that most clients want the IRR of say 20 to 25%, because that's the return that they require on a project. What contingencies do we have? What type of organization are we working with? What type of tools, what kind of support structure do we have? SAP or the library or our body of knowledge? What kind of management system sits behind our project? So each of these we'll also dissect in the next couple of weeks, and we'll say, all right, for environmental issues, these are the things that's really important. We are going to try and maintain an ISO standard. We're going to try and make sure that we have a record of decision. Why do we need a record of decision? Why do we need to document everything? Why do we have to follow the stage gate approach? And basically, the question when we look at all these systems is, if it's a small project, can we bypass some of the phases in our stage gate approach? And the answer is basically no, because the stage gate approach, or the approach that we follow for any project, only becomes really important when the project starts failing. All right, so the moment people start saying, oh, this project is not going to make money, we have to start saying, all right, these are the files, these are the documentation that we have for those. All right, so obviously all of these issues we're going to talk about some more, and we're going to try and dissect it. So what is a project? Can we define a project? Is it easy for us to say a project is start to finish? How difficult is it for us to do? Right, so basically, based on all the definitions that's available, it needs to be temporary. And I think, in my mind, that's one of the more important ones. It has to be a temporary endeavor that we have to think about. It has to be a phased life cycle, for instance. There we go, that slide changes back. The project generally bringing about some kind of change. Previously there was nothing, now there's a big factory. Previously there was an open piece of land, now there's a university or a school. And those are the things that we can say, these are the characteristics of a project. if we look at the formal definitions from the different organizations, you can see there's a little bit of movement. In 1987, the Project Management Institute, they had a really lengthy definition for a project. So it's an undertaking with a definite start point, and it's still the key fundamentals still maintained. The middle one there is my favorite: the temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And it's nice and short and sweet, and that's how we should try and keep everything, because the moment we add too much stuff to it, it becomes really problematic, and it becomes a process of trying to define everything. We can also have a look at ISO, the International Standards Organization's definition that came out in 1997. That's still unchanged. It's there, it's really lengthy. It says exactly the same as the Project Management Institute, but it uses a lot more words. Alright, so I'll leave those there for you. Alright, so the different types of projects that we are going to encounter in our lives are not only going to be limited to project management in construction or design or anything like that. There are different types of projects: capital expansion projects, there's information technology projects. A good example of IT projects might be the installation of a new enterprise resource planning system, or SAP, for a government department. Or at the university, we are installing a new system which we call Nexus, and this project has been troublesome from the start, because it's not well thought out. There was no sort of ownership from the people that's going to work with it, and one of the key issues that we'll talk about. There might even be types of projects that require internal initiatives, research and development. So research and development, typically weapons might be a good example there, medicine, the development I saw on the 7 p.m. project tonight, or the project that they were looking at using MRIs for finding prostate cancer. That's obviously a new development that they have to go through. HR projects, typically HR projects goes together with people losing their jobs, so those are really sensitive ones that we have to think about how we're going to manage the aspects of that project. Community, a new school, maybe a new farm or a new park or anything like that. Those might be community type projects. Anything to do with enhancement, not for profit type of projects might be there. So another question for you guys while we're talking about the different types of projects: can a project make money? Alright, so the question is, can a project make money? Remember, at the end of tonight's session, I'm going to ask you guys to tell me the answers to all of these questions. Alright, environmental projects, maintenance projects, and marketing projects, all of those are just examples of different types. Alright, so the typical things that we'll find in a project, or what we'll call the project management artifacts, and as time progresses over the next 12 or so weeks, we'll go through each and every one of these. A project charter, which is basically our legal document to say, yes, please go ahead with our project. What's the business case? What's the financial benefit? If there's no financial benefit, what's the community benefit? What's the corporate responsibility benefit that we're going to get? What's the scope statement? The scope statement, basically, a short definition of scope would be when the contractor has left site, that which is left behind is the scope. Alright, so we have to try and figure out how to easily put the scope into words so that people can understand it and the contractor can price it. Work breakdown structure: how are you going to eat an elephant? Obviously, you're going to make sure that the elephant is dead first before you start eating it, and then you're going to take real small bites out of it, and that's exactly what a work breakdown structure is. You break down the project into smaller pieces so that you can handle it a lot better. Change control plan. Change is inevitable on a project, because when we set out on our project, we assume a lot of things because information is not yet available. So as time progresses, more information becomes available, and of course we have to change and adapt to that. Risk management: what's the risk of the project being flooded? What's the risk of rain, extensions of time? What's the risk of the dog eating my memory stick that contains my assignment? All of those risks are part of the risk management plan. And how do we manage it? Basically, risk management plan should always be empty. The risks that we find in the risk management plan should immediately be addressed, and we should try and get it out of the way. We should mitigate those risks. The communications plan, who talks to who, what's the channels that we follow. The contract wants us to do everything on paper. A simple principle to remember when it comes to contracts: if it's not on paper, it's vapor. So anything that you do verbally, make sure that you confirm it on paper. The same with your life at the university. If you phone somebody, make sure that you do follow it up with an email to say, yeah, these are the things that we discussed. The governance model, how do we control ourselves? What's the ethics that's involved in the project? Risk register, we spoke about that one with together with the risk management plan. The issue log, resource management plan, all of those things will go through as time goes on. The other one that's interesting there, the responsibility assignment matrix, you guys might have come across this one. It's where we have different tasks on the x-axis and we have different people on the y-axis, and we can say, all right, the project manager is responsible for the following tasks. The contracts administrator is responsible for the following tasks, and we'll when we do the financial and time management section of this course, we'll have a look at the responsibility assignment matrix, or the RAM. Right, so the characteristics of a capital project. We have to think about how we're going to finance it, obviously from a client's perspective, and in many cases a lot of you guys will never be on that side of the fence. You won't be responsible for figuring out what the financial strategy is going to be, what the contracting strategy is going to be. In many cases, I'm sure you guys don't know what, or you don't know yet what is meant by the words contracting strategy. It can be an EPC contract or an EPCM contract. What's the project size going to be? What's the complexity? And there you can see there's that word again, complexity, putting up its head, because it's always going to be there. Capital or the capital classification, and this differs from company to company. If you're a tier 1, you might have different rules. If you're a tier 3, you might have different rules again. So this is just a rough order of magnitude. Let's call it a rule of thumb to say a large capital project will be more than 250 million. All right, so that's a fair amount of money that we're going to spend there. When it comes to project type classifications, what is a greenfields project? What is a brownfields project? So the easiest way to remember this is a greenfields project is typically where we go outside and we see Bob Brown, and Bob is there on a brand new piece of land, and it's nice and green and there's grass everywhere. That would be a greenfields project. There's no existing services, no existing buildings or anything like that, and our project is going to stand exactly where those green meadows and everything are. When we talk about the brownfields project, now you have to forget Bob Brown again. The brownfields project is typically where there's existing services. So we've got buildings that's already there. There might be services underground. There might be something overhead power supply, anything like that would be a brownfields project. All right, it might be operational or it might not be. If it's an operational type of project, it means that we have to be really careful. All right, so if you look at those two contracts, brownfields and greenfields, which would be easier? And obviously, the greenfields project will be easier because we don't have to worry about the complexities of existing services and existing buildings. All right, so that is just something that you can think about as well. The third type of project classification, there's a revamp and of course a return to service. So a revamp or return to service also can basically classify as a brownfield because it's basically the same. What's interesting about the return to service project is you don't know what you get. All right, so this would typically be an old coal-powered power station that's been decommissioned for the last 10 years, and you have to now go and recommission that power station for whatever the reason is. and you don't know what spares have been removed from that power station. So that is what makes a return to service project so interesting, is the fact that you don't exactly know what to get. Alright, and there's something for you guys to remember: the high risk projects that you'll encounter in your jobs. Anything that's high profile, that's really out there, that's in the press, that's clearly visible from a highway, something that's going to attract a lot of attention, something where the government is involved in, a desalination plant, a nuclear power plant. All of those are typical examples of high profile projects that if they do go wrong, everybody's going to know about it, and they're going to want to know why it went wrong. Strategic projects, really dangerous sometimes. And what is a strategic project? Now, there's different types. Obviously, from a infrastructure point of view, you can see something as being strategic, something that has to be done, a dam or a power line, or maybe a new road or a bridge. But in terms of economic strategic projects, it might be where you work together with another organization and you cut your profits to just keep the staff employed while the economy is in a slump. That might also be a strategic project. So always be careful. Make sure that you know exactly what the rules of the game is going to be before you start that project. And then, of course, for a project manager, just a small job. Is there something like just a small job? And obviously the answer is no, because a small job carries exactly the same amount of paperwork that a big job does. Alright, so remember what we said, we still have to satisfy each and every one of those things in the stage gate. And then, of course, one-man projects, stay away of those if you can. In and around the house, of course, that's allowed. You can get your partner to do stuff around the house. One-man projects, we'll discuss those a little bit later on again. Alright, so a quick question for you guys, and this is maybe where you have to think about it. So there's a question, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that I've got on the screen there for you. So I'll invite you to have a look at the first one. So, is it a project? The manufacturing of Toyota Land Cruisers. Would you say the first one there is a project? Anybody? Alright, so Steve has indicated yes, that the manufacturing of Toyota Land Cruisers is a project. Alright, what else? Who else would like to have a go at that one? Alright, so Fiona, you've said no. And Tracy, what do you think?
I reckon it would be, because you're starting on a project from the beginning to the end. You want something at the end.
Alright, so that's a good point. So let's look at the second one there, manufacturing the 2011 quota of Toyota Land Cruisers. Now, reading the second one, would you change your answer to the first one? Steve, what do you say? Alright, so Steve, Scott, yep, I've got your answer as well, and Steve says no, it's a change of scope. Alright, and Tracy, what do you think?
I'd agree with Steve.
Alright, so it's a change of scope, and Fiona, what do you think? Ooh, item 2 is a benchmark. Alright, so let's look at those. If we think about the definitions for a project that we found earlier on today, remember we said that it has a defined start and end date. So therefore the first one would actually not be a project. That would be an ongoing venture, because we are maintaining the production of Toyota Land Cruisers. Right, so Toyota Land Cruisers have been being produced since the early 80s, and we keep on doing it, and I'm sure they're coming out with a new model soon. The second one, the manufacturing of the 2011 quota of Toyota Land Cruisers, that would actually be a project. Alright, why? Because on the 1st of January 2011 we'll start the quota, and on the 31st of December we'll finish the quota. Therefore that has a defined start and end date for our qualification of a project. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would.
All right, great. All right, so let's look at it. Thanks. That's perfect. Thanks, Steve and Fiona, for your texts. The power plant annual shutdown for maintenance. Would you say that is a project?
I would say it is because it's got a start and finish date.
All right, so now once we've done one, it becomes easier for us, and it's really simple to say yes. This is there's a start and there's a finish date. All right, so the power plant one, definitely that's a project. So the fourth one there, driving to the office every day. What do you guys think of that one?
No.
Not a project? All right, so Tracy and Fiona, you guys say no. Scott and Steve, yes, it's a start every day and ends every day. And I'm still waiting for Scott to give us all right, so yep, that one, it's small. It's basically small little projects. All right, so it starts and stops every day. So is it part of an ongoing operation? All right, there's ways of seeing this one, and that's the reason why I put that one there. It's a little bit double-sided. Let's do the last one before we give the answer. Driving through Botswana on a holiday. Would you say that is a project?
I would say it is.
All right, that's an easy one. Definitely driving through Botswana on a holiday. That's an easy one for us to say. There's going to be a start and end date. Driving to the office every day. The jury is still out on that one. If you say you're going to start a new project every day, it will be a lot of short little projects. I think driving to the office every day is just an ongoing operation. All right, so in my...
Is that like the first one, Joshua?
It is almost like the first one. That's correct, Grace. It's almost like the first one. Driving to the office every day, manufacturing Toyotas. You know, it's there's no real start and end date until until Toyota goes out of permission, or until we get fired, or we resign, or go on long service leave. And that's why I say driving to the office every day. That's an ongoing operation. So this question will lead into a next session that we'll talk about the different types of contracts that we have. Long-term contracts, short-term contracts, what are contracts used for. All right, so we're on slide number 40. There's about 9 more slides that we can have a quick look at, so I'll move along. I know you guys are keen to get to bed and start doing your other assignments. So the project lifecycle phases. What I've done here is I've tried to get the different organizations or the different types of industries and see if we can map them together and see if we can see if all of them have the same different phases. So you can see there from an engineering point of view, startup, definition, main, termination, really simple, short. Manufacturing adds in another 2 or 3 phases. And then of course construction on the side. This is where we are going to operate mostly in, and you'll see there's an extra few phases that we have to go through. Now the moment you guys start working in industry, you'll see that your organization that you work for might have what we call a stage gate approach. Alright, so you've heard the word before tonight. I've mentioned it a few times. Next week I'll give you an example of a stage gate approach. But a stage gate approach is basically representing each one of these phases. So the first phase might be called something like a concept or idea generation, where we do the planning and the initial idea gathering, and we get all the clever people in a room to say this is what we want to do. And before we move on to the second phase, we have to satisfy certain outcomes. Right, and the reason why we have these stage gates in place is obviously to make sure that we're not chasing something pie in the sky. Blue sky thinking is really nice, but we still have to make sure that it is executable at the end of the day. Alright, so next week we'll look into detail into the stage gate approach and how it works and what's different. But what I wanted to show you with this slide is just the different stages that we find in different industries. And I've only chosen 4 industries. There's many other more, like mining, for instance. A lot of you guys will be involved in mining projects, so that's you can maybe for next week go and try and figure out exactly what you guys do in your business. Do you have a stage gate approach, and do you follow the different phases, and give me some feedback on that. All right, so that's for next week. All right, so if we look at the typical hours that we spend on the different phases, so this is based on Australian and American projects. All right, so a study was done by Harold Kersner. He's one of the famous project management authors, and he reckons that based on his research that we spend about 40% of the expenditure on the execution of our project. All right, so we can see there's the rest of it, the real big chunk of it is over there in feasibility, preliminary and detailed planning. So the concept planning or the concept generation, that sits over there. Feasibility 10%, and then of course preliminary planning another 15%. If we go into detailed planning, this is now where we have our detail engineers. They're creating the work packages, they're creating all our scopes and definitions for us, specifications. A lot goes in there. And then of course execution, this is where we actually do the construction work of the project. Now in my opinion, I think Mr. Kersner is a little bit optimistic in execution. I think we do spend a little bit more time in preliminary and detail, and a little bit less time or value in execution. Next week I'll show you the reason why I say that. We've also done our little bit of research on that, so it makes for interesting reading. So if we think about the way that we measure success on projects, obviously there's some project success criteria and factors that we have to keep in mind, and these are, I'll give you a few examples. And these might change, and they will not always be the same for different types of projects, right? And the way that we define the effectiveness of these is we define them before the start of a project. So it's basically the same that we do with your assignments. So before we receive your assignments back from you, we already have our marking scheme worked out. We know what we want to achieve. We know what we want from you guys in terms of an assignment. Because if we don't do that, we will be influenced by what we receive from the different students. Obviously, if I get a good assignment, and I see, oh, all right, this student thought about something else that I don't think of, it might influence how I see others. All right, so it's always a good idea to get these success criteria and factors out of the way right at the onset of the project. And remember, it will not always be exactly the same. All right, and there's different ways or different things that might influence the criteria for a project. So it might be to do with the market or the user that we've got, the owner, the customer satisfaction, the client, the type of industry that we work in. Obviously, Clive Palmer is going to have a different set of success criteria in mind to Bob Brown, for instance. Clive is all about mining. He's going to build the Titanic 2, I read in today's newspaper. So for him, it's going to be about different things. For a large corporate organization, it might be the internal rate of return. Let's say we want to achieve 24% IRR. Why do we want to do it? Because that's the cost of our capital. What's the weighted average cost of capital for an organization? All of those issues are going to be part of the decision-making criteria. And all of these will be addressed in each of the stages that we have to go through, those loops that we have to jump through in terms of our stage gate approach. All right, so here's a few examples of possible success factors that you might consider. Execute the project according to the stage gate. All right, so make sure that you tick all the boxes, complete all the documents, health and safety. All of those things go in there. Effective management of the interfaces. So you want to ask the question, what is an interface? Interface is basically just if there's different disciplines working on the same project. You're on a multidisciplinary project that have to link into each other. So services, you've got electricity, water, air conditioning, gas, all of those services have to work together on a large organizational plant, or let's say a large gas to liquid installation. How are you going to manage those? The integration of internal and external stakeholders, really important, because you have to align, and it's sort of a management of the expectations. That's what it's all about when it comes to a real successful project. You might see that in some cases you produce a crappy project, but because you sold it as a good project and you manage the expectations, you do come out in one piece on the other side. All right, so obviously those are things that you have to remember once you get into that environment. The ability to lead and work and align diverse groups. All right, so if you're going to work in the Middle East, for instance, you have to prepare yourself for a culture shock, because over there's multinationals, there's many different cultures that you have to work with. Even if you think about working in Australia at the moment, it's basically becoming a country of immigrants, where there's just people from each and every walk of life working in the same office as we are, and we have to manage that process. Right, so the last little section that we quickly want to talk about is change management and contracts, and this is just a 2 or 3 slide introduction to change. Why do we want to manage the change? Obviously, if there's resistance to change, it's going to influence the uptake, the success of our project, and of course we need to make sure that we do have buy-in from all our stakeholders and our role players in a project. Alright, so the sources of change that we might encounter on a project. Scope. Alright, remember what we said, there's 2 types of changes to scope. Scope growth, which is legal, scope creep, which is illegal. Alright, so think about those 2, which of them and how you're going to manage them. Alright, so remember scope creep, that's the one that the contractor will not get paid for typically, and then of course scope growth, that's the one that he will be paid for authorized changes. The project management team, alright, make sure that you select your team well. It's all about managing people. Alright, it's all about managing people at the end of the day. It's not about the project itself, it's about making sure that the people that you have on that project is aligned with the project goals and vision and the scope. Alright, so external sources of change might be the people that's going to do some work for you. If you outsource stuff, is it cheaper to outsource stuff? Is it cheaper to do it yourself? The legislation, changes in legislation is really important. So a biggie one there for us is of course the carbon tax. That's going to be a biggie for us in the next couple of months. We need to think about what's going to happen there, and it's not going to be easy for us to get past that one. And then of course public opinion. I saw the polls tonight. They reckon that the power has swung in the government, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly how the public opinion swings basically the government. Alright, so changes in the organization that we have to think about. Corporate strategy might be a source of change. Governments, so for instance the Disability Act or the DDA or the Australian Standard 1428 dealing with disability access. That might be a good example. If you guys think back to 1999, 2001, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that came to power in the United States because of the Enron scandal. All right, so those are the reporting governance changes that we have. Now we have to basically say this is what we pay our directors, this is what a bank manager pays or is paid, this is the reason. We have to be transparent for all of those financial decisions that we have to take. And then of course also if we're going to do a change to the methodology that we've always used, how is that going to influence the project? So this is the continuous improvement model. This is a model by Deming, and this has been around forever, and I thought I'd just slip this one in so that you guys can have a quick look at it. Plan, do, check and act, and this is a continuous process, and it comes back to what we said about monitoring and controlling. Right, so we plan to do something, we set the standards, we do something, we measure our performance, we make changes, and the process starts over again. We set the standards, we measure our performance, we make changes, and continuously we try and make it better and better and better. All right, and I know it's difficult, but it's something that we might consider in something as simple as studies, for instance, as well. And then, of course, the project systems for planning. All right, so there's our objective, basically the scope. This is our house on the top of the mountain. This is how we're going to get there. Will we be able to do the implementation phase? How are we going to do it? There's our feedback loop. This is where we say, this is what we've done. We've measured it. All right, how do we compare it to our previous projects? All right, and can we make it better? So if we compare it to our previous projects, yes, we can make changes. We implement those changes, we measure again, and that continuous process starts over and over again. If we find that we have to do something completely different, it means that our original plan wasn't good enough. All right, so we'll address those changes, and we have to make sure that we make the correct changes for that project. All right, so that's basically what I wanted to talk about tonight. So next week we'll continue our investigation of project management processes, and we'll start looking at organizational structures, institutions, and for projects, and we might even start looking at the first of the knowledge areas, which is going to be scope. All right, so what I'll do is I'll ask you guys for some feedback. Is there anything else that you might want to see next week? Is there anything that you might feel that we didn't cover, or that you would like some more detail on? Now would be the time to give us a little bit of feedback. All right, so Tracy, I can see you want to say something.
I was just wondering, I'm really interested in the Gantt chart.
All right. Well, there's good news for you. One of the sessions that we're going to look at, and that session might run over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to look at the different planning tools that we have, and I'll take you through the time management process. So we'll look at the Gantt chart, we'll look at CPM, and all of those that you're going to need in order for you to create that Gantt chart. So that's the fifth thing that I want to do. So that's about, let's say, 6 or 7 weeks away, but it is there.
Thank you, that's great.
All right. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, yeah, I think you're of course welcome to just send me an email. Let's say for tonight, later on, you think about something, just post it onto the forum, the watering hole, and I'll pick it up in the morning and make sure that we do address it next week. So yeah, remember, these sessions are yours, and you guys design it, and I'll make sure that we've got information. I'll share what I have with you guys, and hopefully it will make your life easier and better, and you'll be able to use some of the stuff in your projects.
Thanks very much, Joshua. It's much appreciated.
All right, great stuff. All right, and then I'll see you guys next week.
Okay, 99.
Cheers.